The night was bitterly cold, the kind of cold that sinks into your bones and makes the world feel like it's holding its breath. Heather Cole and her partner, Gary Reid, were speeding down Highway 67 in rural Montana. It was a stretch of road they both knew well, narrow, winding, and deadly in the winter. The snow had been falling steadily for hours, and the freezing temperatures had turned the road into a slick, treacherous nightmare. The engine of the ambulance rumbled in the stillness, the only sound breaking the heavy silence of the night. Heather kept her eyes on the road, her grip tight on the steering wheel. "We're almost there," she said, more to herself than to Gary. The air was thick with tension. They both knew how dangerous this stretch of highway could be, especially in these conditions. One wrong move and they could end up in the ditch or worse. Gary shifted in his seat, eyes scanning the dark road ahead. "How much longer?" he asked, his voice rough from years of answering emergency calls in this kind of weather. Heather glanced at the clock on the dashboard. "About 10 minutes. But then, out of nowhere, something appeared in the headlights. A massive German shepherd, standing completely still in the middle of the road. The dog didn't move, didn't even flinch as their ambulance barreled toward it. Heather's heart skipped a beat. "Shit!" she yelled, slamming her foot on the brake. The wheels locked and the ambulance skidded, spinning sideways on the icy road. The dog didn't budge. It just stared ahead, its gaze unblinking, like it owned the road. The ambulance slid closer, too close for comfort. Heather's hands tightened on the wheel as they missed the dog by mere inches. Gary's breath caught in his throat. "Jesus, Heather, that was too close." But the dog remained there motionless, as if waiting for them. Heather's pulse raced, but something about the situation felt off. The dog wasn't scared. It wasn't even running away. It was like it had been placed there on purpose, like it was waiting for them to stop. Without thinking, Heather threw open the passenger door. "Stay here," she told Gary. But she was already stepping out into the biting cold. She could feel the chill cutting through her jacket, but the dog didn't move. It was almost as if it was waiting for her to approach. The shepherd turned slowly, its eyes locking onto hers, amber and intense. Heather felt a strange tug, an unspoken call, deep in her gut. "Easy, boy," she murmured, taking a cautious step forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "You lost or something?" The dog didn't answer. Instead, it slowly turned and began walking, its paws crunching the snow as it made its way into the woods. It didn't look back, just moved with a quiet, purposeful stride. Gary yelled from the ambulance, "Heather, what are you doing? We've got a job to do." But Heather wasn't listening. There was something about the dog that pulled at her, something she couldn't ignore. She took a deep breath, her instincts screaming at her to follow. "I'll be right back," she called over her shoulder as she followed the German shepherd into the trees. And with that, the journey into the unknown began. Heather hesitated, the cold air biting at her cheeks as she looked back toward the ambulance. Gary's voice echoed through the night, sharp and full of disbelief. "Heather, what the hell are you doing? We've got a job to do." But Heather barely heard him. Her gaze was fixed on the German shepherd, its posture rigid with intent. It moved forward with confidence, its tail low but steady. Heather felt a pull, deep in her gut, like this dog knew something they didn't. "Gary," she said softly, not taking her eyes off the dog. "I think we should follow him." Gary's boots crunched in the snow as he joined her, but the skepticism was clear in his voice. "You're out of your mind. This dog's a stray, he's probably lost. We've got a real emergency waiting for us." "I know," Heather replied, her voice steady. "But there's something about him. He's not just wandering. He's leading us somewhere. I can feel it." Gary grunted, but he stayed close, behind her, trudging through the deepening snow. The dog continued to move ahead, seemingly unaffected by the cold, its steps deliberate and slow. It wasn't running, wasn't frantic, just moving with purpose. "Come on, Heather, this is crazy," Gary muttered under his breath. "We're gonna get lost out here chasing some dog." But Heather wasn't listening. Every step she took felt heavier, like the forest was drawing her in, urging her forward. The dog paused for a moment, turning back to check on them. Its eyes locked onto hers, bright, amber, knowing. "See? He's waiting for us," Heather said, her heart racing. She was beginning to understand the connection. This wasn't just any dog. This was something else, something far more significant. The shepherd let out a soft bark, and then, without another glance, it disappeared deeper into the trees. It seemed to dissolve into the night like a shadow. Damn it. Gary grumbled, but his footsteps quickened. I don't like this, but I'm not letting you go alone. Heather didn't look back. She trusted the dog. The tug she felt, the feeling that something important was unfolding, was too strong to ignore. They had to follow. Gary followed, her still muttering under his breath, but Heather's focus was entirely on the dog. Each time they lost sight of him, it would reappear in the distance, like a silent guide. The forest closed in around them, the snow crunching beneath their boots, but Heather wasn't afraid. There was something familiar about the shepherd's movements, something instinctual, like he was leading them toward something they couldn't yet see. He's not just lost, Heather whispered, as they both pushed through the trees, chasing after the shadow ahead. He's taking us somewhere, and I think we're meant to be there. The pull grew stronger with every step. Heather and Gary had been walking through the snow for what felt like hours. The temperature had dropped even further, and each breath they took came out in misty clouds, vanishing into the cold air. The path had become narrower, the trees thicker, and the snow deeper. Heather's boots sank into the white blanket with every step, but she didn't mind. She was focused on the German shepherd, who was now a few paces ahead, guiding them through. The wilderness Gary, on the other hand, was becoming more frustrated with every passing minute. Heather, this is insane. We've been following this dog for miles. We should have been on the road hours ago. I know, but it's like he's leading us to something, Heather replied, barely looking back at him. I can't explain. I just know. Gary let out a huff of disbelief. Yeah, right. And I'm supposed to just follow a stray dog through the woods in the middle of the night? We don't even know where we're going. Heather didn't answer. She kept her eyes fixed on the German shepherd, whose steady movements never faltered. The dog was calm, almost eerily so, considering the harsh conditions. It wasn't panting or struggling in the snow. It was just moving with purpose. Then, in the distance, a faint bark echoed through the trees. It wasn't loud, just a soft cry carried on the wind, but it was enough to make Heather stop in her tracks. She turned to Gary. Did you hear that? Gary raised an eyebrow, his face clouded with doubt. It's just the wind, probably nothing. No, Heather insisted, her voice urgent. It came from over there. She pointed toward a dense patch of trees. The dog heard it too, that's why he stopped. Gary's face remained skeptical, but the bark came again, clearer this time, pulling Heather forward. We're getting closer. Come on, Gary, this might be it. Reluctantly, Gary followed her, though he still grumbled under his breath. The dog was now waiting for them at the base of a steep ravine, standing perfectly still, his head turned just slightly as if checking to make sure they were following. Then, without waiting, it trotted toward the edge of the ravine, looking down into the darkness below. Heather's heart raced. She approached the edge carefully, her eyes scanning the shadows. She couldn't see anything at first, but then, as the light of her flashlight cut through the trees, she saw it. A pickup truck flipped on its side, half buried in the snow. The lights were off, but there was something eerie about the stillness. The dog. He's been here, Heather whispered, stepping closer. Gary peered over her shoulder, his skepticism growing more obvious. What, you think he led us to a crash site? This is a stretch, Heather. But Heather wasn't listening. She was too focused on the scene below. The German shepherd stood at the edge, its eyes locked on her, waiting for her next move. The dog's calmness, its confidence, it was all too deliberate. There's something more here, Gary, Heather said softly. This isn't a coincidence. Gary opened his mouth to argue, but the words didn't come. He was staring at the dog now, and for the first time, even he could feel the weight of the moment. The dog barked once, short and sharp, then turned back toward the trees. It was as if it was telling them to hurry. Heather didn't hesitate. "We need to get down there," she said, her voice steady. "Something tells me we're not too late." The sharp, biting wind cut through Heather's jacket as she carefully descended into the ravine. Her flashlight beam flickered across the wreckage below, revealing the overturned pickup truck. Snow had piled up around it, but the crumpled frame and broken glass told the grim story. It had crashed hard. It was a miracle that it hadn't slid further down the slope. Gary's voice crackled through the radio, but Heather barely heard him. Her focus was on the scene in front of her. The German Shepherd was standing motionless a few feet away, eyes locked on the wreck. Its calmness was unsettling. "We're here," Heather whispered, almost to herself. "Gary, help me with the man." Gary sighed but moved to assist her. As they reached the truck, Heather opened the driver's side door, careful not to cut herself, on the glass. Inside, the driver, a man in his late 30s, was slumped over, unconscious, his face bruised and pale. He wasn't moving, but there was a faint, shallow breath escaping his lips. "We need to get him out now," Heather said urgently, checking his pulse. "He's alive, barely. Gary, stay with him." Gary gave her a curt nod, then began assessing the situation with practiced urgency. Heather turned her attention to the passenger side, where a child's car seat was still strapped in place. Her heart skipped as she saw the small, motionless body, barely visible under the layers of winter clothes. She opened the door, her breath catching in her throat. The boy was barely conscious, his face pale and his lips tinged blue. His body was cold to the touch. No, Heather muttered, her voice breaking as she checked for a pulse. It was weak, but it was there. "We need to get him warm, Gary," Heather called. "He's freezing." Gary looked over from the driver's side, his face stricken. "What the hell happened to them?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "The truck must have gone off the road hours ago," Heather said, voice steady but filled with worry. "But why did the dog lead us here? It's been circling this place, guarding them." As Heather started to work on the boy, her mind raced. Her eyes kept drifting to the German Shepherd who was still standing by the truck, watching intently. The tracks around the wreckage were unmistakable. The dog had been pacing around, the truck leaving a trail in the snow. It had stayed with them, kept watch, protecting the victims through the brutal night. Gary finally came around to her side. "Look at the tracks, Heather. The dog, it's been here all this time. How is it still standing? It hasn't even flinched." Heather nodded, her heart heavy with realization. It wasn't just looking for help, it was keeping them alive, keeping the boy warm. The boy's weak voice cut through the moment. "Is the dog gone?" Heather froze. The child's eyes opened, cloudy, but still alive. "No, honey," she whispered, smoothing the boy's hair back. "The dog's still here. He's been with you." The boy's eyes shifted toward the German Shepherd, his small voice cracking. "He stayed with me all night." Heather looked at the dog, understanding now. The shepherd hadn't just found them. It had stayed, protected, and warmed the child. It was as if the animal knew its job was to keep the boy alive until help arrived. "Thank you," she whispered to the shepherd, tears welling up in her eyes. "You saved him." The dog didn't move, but in Heather's heart she knew the job was far from over. Heather's hands shook as she gently wrapped the small child in an emergency blanket, trying to bring some warmth back to his frozen body. His lips were still blue, his breath shallow, but there was life in him. For now, that was all that mattered. The German Shepherd stood nearby, watching them, its eyes never leaving the boy. "Stay with him, buddy," Heather whispered, her voice tight. She couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of gratitude for the dog. Without its presence, the child would have been long gone, lost to the brutal cold of the Montana wilderness. Gary worked frantically, assessing the man's condition, but his eyes often flicked toward the dog, just as Heather's did. "Heather, we wouldn't have made it without that dog. Look at the tracks around the truck. It was circling them all night." Heather nodded, her gaze locked on the shepherd. The dog was standing perfectly still, as if it knew its job was done. It was calm, as if this moment had been its purpose, all along. The animal had been pacing around the wreck, keeping the boy warm through the night with its body heat, offering shelter in the freezing cold. How did he know? Heather murmured, more to herself than to Gary. How did he know to be here, to stay with them, to protect them? Gary wiped his brow, frustration and awe mixing in his expression. Maybe he's just a stray looking for food or shelter, but there's something about him, Heather. Something I can't explain. Heather swallowed hard, her throat tight. It's more than that. He was guarding them. He stayed with them. He kept the boy alive, Gary. He kept him warm. She took a deep breath as she worked quickly, injecting the boy with warming fluids. Her hands were steady, but her mind was racing. The dog had appeared out of nowhere, at just the right moment, on the exact stretch of road where the crash had happened. It was as if it had known they'd need help, as if it had known exactly where to be and when to be there. The boy's shivering slowed as his body began to respond to the warmth. Heather exhaled in relief. "He's going to make it," she whispered, a tear slipping down her cheek. "He's going to make it." Gary, still kneeling next to the man, glanced up. "Do you think the dog's a sign or something? I mean, how does an animal know all of this?" Heather stared at the dog, who was now sitting at the edge of the wreckage, still, watching them, alert but calm. "I don't know, Gary. I just know he was meant to be here." Gary stood up and walked over to the dog, kneeling down in front of it. "You saved them, didn't you, boy?" he said softly, his voice cracking. "You kept them alive." The shepherd didn't move, but in its gaze Heather could feel the connection. It was as if it understood the gratitude, the recognition of its heroism. And somehow, Heather knew this wasn't just a coincidence. The dog had been sent for a reason. He knew. She whispered again, more firmly this time. He knew. The snow still fell softly around the wreckage, and the air was thick with the sound of crunching snow and distant voices as the rescue team began to arrive. Heather stood near the truck, watching as the medevac team prepped the man for transport. The child, now stabilized, was wrapped tightly in blankets, his small form breathing more steadily than before. But through all the chaos, Heather's gaze never strayed from the German shepherd. The dog stood motionless, watching the scene unfold, with an eerie calmness. It wasn't frantic or anxious like most animals would be in such a stressful situation. No, the shepherd was still, observant, almost as if it was processing every detail, every movement around it. "It's like he's waiting for something," Heather murmured to herself, her heart tightening with each passing second. She couldn't explain it, but there was something deeply unsettling about the way the dog observed everything without flinching. It was as if it knew something the rest of them didn't. Gary, busy coordinating with the medics, glanced over at the dog. "You're still watching him, huh? What do you think he's doing?" "I don't know," Heather answered softly. "It's like he's part of something bigger, like he's not just a dog. There's more to him than that." Gary raised an eyebrow. "You're starting to sound like that dog's a hero or something. It's just a stray." "No," Heather said, shaking her head. "There's something different about him. Did you see how calm he was earlier? How he stayed with the boy, kept him warm through the night?" Gary didn't respond, but his skeptical eyes softened. He wasn't sure what to think. But the way the dog stayed close, never straying far from the wreck, felt almost intentional. Heather took a step closer to the dog, her heart racing. She had this overwhelming sense of gratitude, but also a deep curiosity. She couldn't shake the feeling that the shepherd wasn't just some stray. It had been in the right place at the right time, doing something that no other animal could have done. It had known exactly what was needed. As Heather knelt down in front of the dog, it didn't flinch. It simply watched her, its amber eyes filled with a strange intelligence that sent chills down her spine. For a moment, everything else seemed to fade away. The sounds of the rescue team, the cold wind, even the snow falling around them. The dog's gaze was steady, unwavering, and Heather felt an unspoken connection between them, one she couldn't explain. It was as if the shepherd was trying to communicate, to share something with her, something deep and ancient. "You're more than just a dog, aren't you?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "You've been watching over them. Over us." The German shepherd's tail twitched slightly, and for the first time since they'd arrived, it took a step toward Heather. It sat down beside her, still watching, but this time there was an almost peaceful calm in its demeanor. Gary watched from a distance, his arms crossed. "Guess it's not just a stray after all, huh?" he muttered, half to himself. But Heather didn't hear him. She was too focused on the dog, on the strange bond that had formed between them in this fleeting moment. The dog seemed to understand, as if it knew it had done its part. As the medevac team finished preparing the victims for transport, Heather reached out and gently placed a hand on the dog's head. The contact was brief but powerful, and for a split second she felt a surge of warmth, of comfort, something she couldn't explain but would never forget. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You saved them." The dog simply sat, calm and watchful, as if waiting for the next step. And Heather knew deep down that whatever that next step was, the dog would be there, watching over them, always. The shelter was quiet when Heather arrived, the only sound, the soft hum of the overhead lights. She stood outside the gate for a moment, watching the snow continue to fall, her breath visible in the cold air. Her mind was racing. The German shepherd had saved the boy's life, and now it was here, behind these walls, perfectly calm and peaceful. But there was something about him, something that didn't feel like just a regular dog. It felt like he was waiting for something or someone. "Heather, you're back." The shelter worker, Anna, greeted her, stepping into the cold with a clipboard in hand. "We've been keeping an eye on him. He's not what we expected." Heather nodded. "I know. He's different." Anna led her to the back where the German shepherd had been placed in a clean, quiet kennel. As they approached, Heather saw the dog lying on his side, his fur smooth and well kept, a bowl of food untouched, beside him. His amber eyes shifted toward them, but he didn't move. He didn't bark or get excited like most dogs did when visitors came. He simply watched. "Has he been like this the whole time?" Heather asked, her voice low. "Yeah," Anna replied. "He's calm, not aggressive, not anxious. He eats, drinks, rests, but doesn't show any signs of wanting to interact much. And there's no collar, no microchip, no identification at all." Heather knelt down in front of the kennel, staring into the dog's eyes. The shepherd's gaze never wavered. It was steady, almost knowing. "It's like he's waiting," Heather said quietly, almost to herself. Anna frowned. "Waiting for what?" "I don't know," Heather admitted, her heart heavy with confusion. "But I feel like there's more to him. More than just some stray who wandered into a snowstorm." The dog let out a soft, almost imperceptible sigh, and Heather could swear it was as if he understood every word she said. She sat down, her knees pressing against the cold floor. "You saved him, didn't you?" she whispered. "You saved the boy." The German shepherd tilted its head slightly, his eyes softening. But still it didn't move. It just watched Heather, as if listening, understanding. "Heather, I don't get it," Anna said, breaking the silence. "You think this dog, has some kind of purpose?" "I don't know," Heather replied, her voice shaky. "But it feels like it. Like he was meant to be there, at the crash site when we needed him. Like he's been waiting for something. Someone, for a long time." Anna leaned against the wall, looking at the dog. "Well, whatever it is, he's not just some lost animal. You can see it in his eyes." Heather's heart clenched. She couldn't shake the feeling that the German shepherd had been part of something much bigger than a random rescue. That somehow, he wasn't done yet. As they stood in silence, the shepherd stood up slowly, moving to the edge of the kennel, its eyes still locked on Heather. It was as if it was waiting for her to make the next move. "What are you waiting for?" Heather whispered, almost afraid to ask, afraid the answer might change everything. But the dog only turned slightly, moving to lie down again, as if it was content to wait for whatever was next. "He's not just a dog," Heather whispered, her heart full of unanswered questions. "He's something more." The days after the crash passed in a blur. Heather went through the motions, work, paperwork, calls, and the constant weight of the rescue on her mind. But there was something that wouldn't leave her thoughts. The German Shepherd, Frost. He wasn't just a dog. He was something more, something she couldn't explain. She had taken him in, though she didn't quite know why. Maybe it was the pull she felt every time she saw him. Maybe it was the quiet way he watched over her, how he stood at her side like a guardian. One evening, Heather sat on her couch, Frost curled at her feet. He was so still, so calm. It was as if he didn't belong to this world, yet he had shown up at the exact moment she needed him. "You've been with me through all this, haven't you?" Heather whispered to him, her voice full of emotion. "You've been watching over me, just like you did with that boy." Frost lifted his head slightly, his amber eyes locking onto hers. He didn't bark or whine. He just watched. It was almost as if he understood every word she said. As the days passed, the bond between them grew. Heather couldn't shake the feeling that Frost was more than just a companion. There were times when she could feel his presence even when he wasn't physically near her. It was as if he could sense things she couldn't, like a silent, invisible thread connecting them. It was on one of these days that the truth hit her. Frost had begun alerting her before anything happened. One morning, just as she was preparing to leave for work, he stood up, his tail stiff. He walked over to the door, then back to Heather, looking up at her with a focused intensity. "What is it, boy?" Heather asked, confused. Frost barked once, then paced to the door again, as if urging her to follow. All right. What is it?" Heather said, heart racing. She grabbed her bag and went outside, only to find an emergency call waiting for her on her phone. It was a car crash on Route 67, right where they had first met. Her heart sank as she looked at Frost, who was standing perfectly still, watching her intently. He had known. He had sensed it before she did. "You knew, didn't you?" she whispered to him. "You knew something was going to happen." Frost didn't respond, of course. He simply trotted alongside her as she rushed to her ambulance, his presence grounding her. That night, after the crash was handled, Heather sat with Frost once again. He lay beside her, his head resting on her lap as she stroked his fur. "I don't know how you do it," she said softly. "But I trust you. I trust you with my life." The bond between them wasn't just emotional anymore. It was something deeper, something unspoken. Frost was her protector, her silent partner, and Heather knew that somehow his purpose in her life was far from finished. It had been a month since the day Frost had become part of Heather's life, and with each passing day she grew more convinced that he wasn't just a dog. He was something more, a guide, a protector, a silent partner. But it wasn't until one fateful day that Heather truly understood the depth of their bond. The call came in early, before the sun had even risen. A hiker was missing in the mountains, lost in a remote area where the terrain was treacherous, and the weather had turned cold. The team scrambled into action, Heather and Frost included. As she gathered her gear, Heather could feel the weight of the situation settling in. The stakes were higher now. This wasn't just a typical rescue. This was a life on the line. "Frost, stay close," Heather murmured as she strapped her backpack on and grabbed the leash. Frost stood tall by her side, his eyes bright and alert. The search began, with Heather and the team combing the mountainside for any sign of the missing hiker. But as the hours passed, the search felt hopeless. The snow had thickened and visibility was low. The hiker's last known location was deep within a dense patch of trees, an area too dangerous to search without proper guidance. Frost, however, seemed unbothered. His movements were calm but focused, as if he knew exactly where to go. As Heather moved to one side, Frost tugged at the leash, pulling her toward a different path. "Where are you going, boy?" Heather asked, confused. But Frost wasn't answering. He simply led the way, his body low to the ground, moving faster now. His behavior was different, more intense, like he was zeroing in on something. He was no longer just walking. He was searching. As Heather followed, she could feel a shift in the air. Frost was on a mission. He led her deeper into the woods, through thick snow and over jagged rocks, as though he could sense something she couldn't. Then, after what felt like an eternity, Frost stopped at the edge of a steep ravine. His ears pricked, and his nose to the ground. Heather's heart skipped a beat. "What is it, boy?" she asked, breathless from the trek. Frost barked once sharply, then turned back toward Heather, looking at her with those knowing eyes. It was as if he was telling her to look down below. Heather peered over the edge of the ravine, and there, lying partially covered in snow, was the hiker, injured but alive, his chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. "Oh my God," Heather whispered, rushing down to his side. "We found him." Frost stood at the top of the ravine, watching, silently. He had led her straight to the hiker, exactly where he needed to be. Heather worked quickly, checking the man's vitals and calling in for help. The medics arrived soon after, and as they carefully stabilized the hiker for transport, Heather stood there in awe. "He knew," Heather whispered to herself, looking at Frost, who was still watching from above. "He knew where to go, when to go. He saved him." As the medics took the hiker away, Heather walked over to Frost and crouched beside him. "You're not just a dog, are you?" she said softly. "You were meant to be with me, to help me." Frost's tail gave a small wag and Heather smiled, the connection between them stronger than ever. She knew now, without a doubt, that Frost was her partner in every sense of the word. They weren't just a team, they were a force working together, and nothing could stand in their way. Weeks had passed since the hiker's rescue, and Heather could feel the change in the air. It wasn't just the cases she responded to or the emergencies that piled up. It was the presence of Frost, always by her side, always guiding her. His actions, his instincts, his calmness under pressure. Everything about him told Heather that their connection was something far beyond ordinary. He had saved lives, and he had saved her, in ways that words could never explain. As they sat quietly in the ambulance one evening, waiting for the next call, Heather glanced down at Frost. He lay calmly on the floor, his head resting on his paws, his eyes always alert yet never anxious. It was as if he was waiting for the moment when someone would need him again. "Heather, you know the word's gotten out about him, right?" Gary said, glancing at her from the front of the ambulance. He had noticed, too, how everyone in the community had started to speak of Frost as something extraordinary. "Yeah, I've heard," Heather replied quietly. "The miracle dog. It's crazy." "Crazy good, though," Gary added with a small smile. "I've never seen anything like it. People around here are calling him a hero. Word's spreading fast, your dog's a legend." Heather smiled but felt a lump in her throat. "I don't think it's just luck," she said, more to herself. Then to Gary. "I think something more." Gary raised an eyebrow. "More than a dog, you mean?" "Exactly," Heather nodded. "It's like he's meant to be here with me. I don't know how to explain it, but he's saved so many lives already. I trust him with my life now." Gary was silent for a moment, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Well, if you trust him, then that's all that matters." Heather watched Frost for a moment, his peaceful presence comforting her. She couldn't help but think about everything that had led them to this point. It wasn't just about saving the boy or the hiker. It was about the way Frost had come into her life, the way he had guided her through moments when she felt lost. He had been her constant, her guardian, in a world where chaos often reigned. The radio crackled, breaking the silence. A new emergency call came through, a vehicle accident on a narrow road, just outside of town. Heather felt a wave of urgency. She looked down at Frost and he lifted his head at the same moment, his eyes locking with hers. "Let's go, boy," Heather whispered, a sense of calm washing over her. Frost stood immediately, ready for whatever was to come. As they drove toward the scene, Heather realized that the real miracle wasn't just that Frost saved people, it was that he had shown her what it truly meant to be saved. Sometimes the ones who need saving aren't the victims. It's the ones who save others, the ones who carry the weight of the world and never ask for anything in return. Frost wasn't just a dog. He was her miracle, her hero, and together, they were a force to be reckoned with.